Well, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore, Dan.
Wait, doesn't the season take place in Kansas?
We're reviewing Fargo Season 4, Episode 8, entitled East/West. All right, Dan, a little different episode this week, which we were expecting. Even more different than what we expected. Let's just jump into it, and we can just start talking about it in general. This episode starts out with a quote, and it's not this is a true story. That does happen, but we start out with a different quote. I didn't get it down fully, did you? I can start the first half, and then you can start the second.
Yeah, I could try and finish your sentence.
So the quote is, "Life is nothing but a competition."
And then something about violence.
Okay, cool.
All I wrote down was that it was a Bertrand Russell quote. But that's all I got on that.
And I think this is definitely going to be a theme in today's episode. There's a lot of stuff here, but we are recording minutes after we've watched the episode, and we haven't done proper research yet. But I think that's the fun of this podcast, is that it's our literal thoughts afterwards. And, occasionally we'll do some research, but most of this is just off the top of our heads, or like going back in our heads to what happened in previous episodes. And then we move on to my favorite thing this Fargo universe has ever created, like, to be specific, like the TV series created after the fact, actually after its first season also. I love that there's a book of the history of like crimes in the Midwest from like 18 something to like the present. I think it's such like a fun little mystical element that they have in it, that they like have all of these Midwest crimes written down in some book. Unfortunately, we didn't get Martin Freeman back as the narrator, but I would highly recommend reading that page, like pausing it and reading it, because it's a very fun read. It's a very, we play this game called Fiasco, and it's based off Coen Brothers films, but the writer who wrote that just like is very, very good with his words, and it's a good read, and I just love that book so much. And it's destroyed, and then it transforms from the page to cornfields, and then it goes black and white, which is what happens most of the episode.
I think the idea of that book existing is really great, just like you mentioned. I made an intentional choice not to really read the paper, like the piece of paper that's stuck on the thing, because I knew that if I read it, I was going to find out the ending of the episode, and you kind of do. If you go back and read it, it kind of gives you the information that you need to know what ends up happening. And that's a detail that I really love about this. I think this episode plays with time a little bit. It plays, again, with history, and by bringing that book back in, it's just a fun little callback, but also a fun way of playing with things that I think we all were sort of expecting. In our prediction video, or our prediction portion of the video, we were talking about how we thought Rabbi Milligan and Calamita probably weren't going to make it out of this episode. And I think that Noah Hawley and the rest of the writers kind of saw that also. Like, I think that they were aware that we were catching on to that, and I think that kind of plays into it.
I mean, they listen to our podcast.
Very true. We're going to get Noah Hawley on the pod for the season finale.
If only. Anyways, so we move on to Omi. We get a lot of time with Omi in the first, I want to say like 3 to 5 minutes of this episode. He's been a fun character that we've pointed out occasionally. I wouldn't necessarily say he gets like a ton of time this episode, but he gets like a lot of just like fun little things that he gets to do. He has this like captive that he's like pushing around like in the beginning of the episode, and there's a lot of interesting stuff there with just like race. And when they arrive at the gas station, and he's banging in the trunk, the guy who's attending the gas station, who I guess also died, which is kind of sad to think. But he asks Omi if he's ever met a Korean, and it kind of just harkens back to that thing we've been talking about all season, about how like different races who are like oppressed are just being oppressive towards other races too. Which is funny, like the Korean War and stuff is coming up, but it's just kind of funny to see like a pre-desegregated United States, because again, it's not even 100 years ago, and it was just so shitty, and we'll talk about that later too. But yeah, beautiful in the black and white, and him and the captive like start painting this gas station, and they're they're really bad at painting. I just want to point that out.
They're the worst painters. They're so bad. I mean, Omi is doing okay, but the captive is not. He's just doing like a big circle on the side of the barn or the area. Like, what is this guy doing?
And then then afterwards they get a soda. This captive has a monologue about America, which is just very classic this season. Just like an analogy with turtles. And then Omi doesn't hesitate. He sees Calamita's car come up. The captive starts running towards him. And Omi kills him. And then there's a great fucking shot of Calamita pulling up.
I love, again, when they bring history into the show and they do it so well. So just the mention of the Korean War is really interesting, and just how like this random person, this random gas station attendant in the middle of nowhere thinks about the Korean War and about how Truman's going to send his son into war. So that was fun. I thought he was pretty fun in that scene. My biggest note is just the horrible paint job. Like that was atrocious. I could put on my scholar brain and say that he was cueing us into the tornado that was going to come later by drawing circles, but that's just not the case.
He's just a bad painter, and he should be thrown through a table.
Yeah, he should be. But I like the scene a lot. I think there's a couple of times in this episode where my bias as a fan of certain types of shows and films prevents me from, like, it kind of takes me out a little bit, because I love the scene as it is. It's like a really fun hang. Like, it's just a good, chill, sort of relaxing hang in 1950s. And I kind of wish that there was more of this. I keep mentioning this. Every time that there is an interaction between two African-American characters, I keep saying, I wish that this was the season, because I just think I don't know. I think it's obviously more timely with the issues that are occurring in America today, but also that's sort of what I was expecting and sort of what I wanted out of the season. So it was a nice little scene for Omi. Again, we don't get much time with the canon characters, so just having him hang out for 5 minutes was pretty great.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess we should bring it up now. I just feel like this is kind of an episode we would write. We'd just be like, let's just stop the story and just kind of have fun around this area. And there are so many moments that are so good in this episode because they're split second. When we talk about the duo dinner is what I'm calling it. That's just a perfect example of this, how this episode is really good at telling like concise, like little stories that aren't going to lead to anything. And this is the last time we're going to see them, but it is just a lot of fun. And you put it perfectly, Dan.
And you know what? This whole episode reminded me a lot of The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I felt like a lot of this was basically like, these could have been scenes from A Ballad of Buster Scruggs. It felt very Coen Brothers, but like of a different type of Coen Brothers.
Definitely. And that's always really cool to see in this series because, yes, it is Fargo, definitely, but it is also a love letter to every Coen Brothers film. And if you guys haven't checked out the Coen Brothers, they're one of the best directors of all time, but they also make vastly different movies. A Serious Man is so different than No Country for Old Men. But they still have that little, like, except they both have man or men in the title, I guess, is the only similarity there. Also, just a little funny thing. They also kept like going back to this place in Kansas that had like where someone discovered Pluto or something.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and they only do it twice, and I just thought it was a really funny thing. I think Fargo does well. / just like the Midwest is like interesting because of this. Like they have monuments / museums for like little little things that happened in the middle of America. You know, like so many things happen in big cities, but in middle of America, like this moment of like someone discovering a planet that's no more like today, but was a planet for a while. Like that's like a huge thing in the Midwest for some reason.
Yeah, it's really sweet. It's really endearing, and that's why we love Fargo, is because of those little moments. Because the things that happen in Fargo, I mean, obviously there's murders and there's betrayal and there's all sorts of crazy events. But when you go back to the very first film, what starts it all, it's a very small story, but it is super important to the people that are in it. And so that's kind of why we love it, right? It's so endearing. Everything is so high stakes for them, even though to us we're watching it kind of laughing because of how low stakes it kind of is. So the discovery of Pluto is like a big deal, obviously, but it's even bigger because of what it means for that community. And I think throughout the episode, they go back to the Pluto thing twice. They also showcase like they just showcase a lot of text in this episode. The house that they end up staying at, the little hotel bed and breakfast sort of thing. They focus on the signs there as well. It's a very textual episode. It's a word that you've used a lot this season is very novelistic. Is a very novelistic episode, a chapter, even beginning with chapter 7 of the Midwest crime book.
Cool. Moving right along, there is a beautiful like. I just love when filmmakers like just know what they're doing, and
yeah,
I mean every Fargo filmmaker this season has known, and this shot really like points it out for me. It's the first time we've seen Rabbi Milligan and Satchel for the first time since they left the series for a couple episodes, and it's a reverse shot of the car coming towards the screen instead of going away from the screen, which is just such an easy way to show like, here are these characters, this is where we left them, but now they're like traveling to a new place. And then One Day Prior comes up and I went, okay, like it'll be pretty fast till we get back to like Calamita and Omi and the gas station. But little did we know, no, this episode would only focus, I want to say like 85% on Milligan and Satchel, which is fun, you know. And they pull up near this house, and there's a billboard outside, an unfinished one, and it says "The future is." And I wrote that down, and I'm like, this is definitely gonna come back, and boy, does it.
Yeah, big time. Also, it should be noted, this place that they're staying, this town. It's the pancake capital of the universe.
Yeah.
So again, just a small like attention to text, like the population was 408, like these numbers and these little texts, they pop out. There's like so much love and attention paid to that. Also, it goes without saying, but like the production design this season is just out of this world. Incredible. Making those signs and making the costumes and all of the stuff that they do, it immerses you so heavily, and it's kind of easy to take an episode like this for granted because, I mean, compared to last week's episode, like not that much happens. It's a bottle episode. It's like so well crafted and so well handled that, like I mentioned earlier, it's a really good hang. It's a really fun time. This place is the pancake capital of the universe. And again, speaking to the point about Pluto, the fact that it's of the universe is really endearing to this Midwestern sensibility.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they discovered Pluto there, so it has to be the universe. They know what pancakes taste like on other planets. All right, moving right along. Yeah, they get there. Then apparently the sisters who own this establishment don't like colored people, which is a classic 1950s thing. And again, it's less than a century ago that we lived in these times. And this hotel / house feels very Shining-esque in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I feel like there's just like, you're walking down halls and you like look down a room and you see like a robot man, like weird, you see weird stuff going on.
You see Dr. Horrible attending to like some sickly man.
Yeah, it's like an odd little hotel, and whenever I see odd little hotels, I think immediately of Kubrick's The Shining / just The Shining in general. But yeah, and then Milligan leaves Satchel like immediately when they get there because he needs to get some money. He gives him a knife, and then he says his classic line about like, if I'm not back, I'm like captured or dead.
The moment that stood out to me was when they first get into the hotel and they have to do like a weird little questionnaire sort of thing. And the lady at the desk asks, "Are you Old Testament or New?" And Rabbi Milligan responds with, "Which one is the one where you get to be born again?" And I thought that was a really great Milligan moment. I think that's very telling of the character. His life has been ruined, but hopefully, he's a hopeful character. He's always looking forward.
Exactly. That's a great point, really. And yeah, we'll talk way more about Rabbi Milligan, but a great character this season, and sad to see him fly away. Then Rabbi Milligan goes into town. These like shops look like very quaint. It looks like Lester's shop or like Ed's shop from the first 2 seasons. Just very quaint and nice. And then Rabbi Milligan's like looking for money, and then like a wall's been taken out, so he's a little peeved at the moment.
We'll talk about Wishaw as a performer, hopefully a lot in this episode. Just one small thing though that makes him so much better than everyone else that's in the show. His "I don't trust what's happening right now" face is really good. When he's in the store and he's like, "There used to be a wall here," and they're like, "Huh, what? That's weird." His like, "I don't trust this situation" face, which he uses a lot during the season because he's always like a caged animal, like on the corner, like trying to stay away from the cage. It's just really good. Like there's nothing interesting about that scene. It's important because we have to come back to it later, but the only reason that it stands out in my mind is because of Wishaw's performance. Just small little facial tics and like little brow raises and frowns and just small little acting choices that are really interesting. And when you watch, you're like, oh, his internal monologue is so strong compared to some other actors.
Yes, yeah, definitely. It almost makes you wish like Ben Whishaw was playing like Josto or something.
Yeah, and I think that's actually something that this episode made me think of a lot. We've said this multiple times, but we said last week like we kind of wish that there was an Otis season. There was an Otis and Deffy and Zelmar and Swanee season, and then we kind of wish that there was just the 2 rival gangs season. And then in this episode, I'm thinking, God, imagine what season 4 would have been if it was just, I mean, this weird Wizard of Oz story that they put together in this episode, but just spread out over 10 episodes.
And speaking of Wizard of Oz, Satchel is in the room. He hears the wardrobe, and I'm like, oh God, it's going to be Zombie Man.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it, because I was thinking the same thing. I thought, because he pulls out the knife, too, and I'm thinking, no, Satchel's going to kill Zombie Man.
Could you imagine if Satchel just killed Zombie Man this episode? 30 years prior to the events of season 2, Mike Milligan kills Death as a child. But no, it's not Zombie Man, but it is a rabbit, or more particularly, a dog named Rabbit. Very Toto this episode to Satchel's Dorothy, I suppose. But yeah, and then the dog runs out, and he goes back downstairs, and then he meets this guy, and I kept rewinding it, and I couldn't catch his name. I thought his name was Hunks Wendell. Is that what you got?
I didn't care what his name was.
Yeah, just an odd little scene. Another friend comes, and it's kind of cute. But anyways, Rabbi Milligan comes back. He takes him out. He takes Satchel back to the room. And then Milligan is talking to Satchel about how he couldn't find money, and how like the whole place has changed. And he says a really Rabbi Milligan line, which is really good. He says, "Only a fool thinks the world will stay exactly the same as it was." And for that character, I think that line is just so perfect, because he is constantly changing, and he's trying to change the cyclical nature of violence in his life.
Well, I think that exactly what you just said about that line is very informative for what he then does later in the episode with a decision that he ultimately doesn't make. And we'll get there when we get there, and I'll bring this back up. But I think he really is trying to be better, and he's trying to be a good man. And it's really admirable. he's completely out of his comfort zone. It's just a guy that I really like. I think he takes his boots off. And I had a good time watching him take his boots off. That shouldn't work. If Loy Cannon had a 3-minute scene where he monologues about how things have changed in America and then he takes his shoes off, I wouldn't care. But for whatever reason, this super small little thing, I like watching Rabbi Milligan take his boots off and inspect the little hole in his shoe. It's a good hang. It's a good hang of an episode.
All right, and then here is the duo dinner, which I hinted at before. We just have a bunch of duos here. So we have a pastor and his mother. We have a guy with an eye patch and his young niece, and then we have like the two men we met earlier. One's like a salesman, and then we have two sisters that can't hear each other, and they're sitting at opposite sides of the room. And then we have, in the middle of all of this, we have Satchel and Milligan, who are another duo. This is just such like a strange dinner scene, but it's also very Fargo. Like, I absolutely loved seeing all these characters that we'll never see again, and they don't matter. The big thing in this scene, besides like the Goldilocks fairy tale analogy, is Milligan says there's honest work out in Sioux Falls.
They mentioned the Sioux Falls thing. They also like mentioned that the guy with the eye patch was at Wounded Knee. So another like just little throwaway line, giving some plugs to Native American life and iconography and history. They tend to just drop those in every now and then, just as like a reference. This scene, I mentioned the Ballad of Buster Scruggs, but this scene felt sort of like the horse carriage scene in Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which just is really cool and really weird and very Coen. One other thing that I liked about this and got me really nervous, actually, is when they ask Rabbi Milligan his name, he says, "I'm Duffy," and I got really nervous. I was like, oh no, they're going to name drop Mike Milligan now. He's going to be like, "I'm Duffy and this is Mike." Fortunately, they don't do that. I forget what name he gives them, but
he just says he's my ward.
That also got me thinking, like, okay, so fake names, just throwing out random names. I thought that was going to maybe be a thing going forward. If Milligan made it out, if they went to another place, they would use different fake names, and it would just get you in the habit of thinking, okay, Mike Milligan is a made-up name. It was a weird scene. I liked the energy of the salesman character and how he's like, basically, he just read a self-help book, and he's just quoting the self-help book constantly. He's like, rule number 6, here's that, and that's rule number 9. I was born with 2 funny bones. Ha ha ha. He's like a real quirky, silly character. In the middle of that scene, you almost forget that you're like 30 minutes into this episode, and we have to get back to Calamita, and apparently there's a tornado coming at the end of the episode. It's also in this scene where, I think this is the case for most black and white films and television shows, but at a certain point you stop thinking about it being black and white. You kind of just grow accustomed to it. Like, this is just the reality of the world. And it was in the dinner scene where I forgot that it was black and white.
Then Rabbi Milligan and Satchel, next day they get in the car, and then they stop by the sign, the billboard that's still being built, and it says the future is ... And then Milligan stops and asks the guy, "What's it gonna say?" and then the guy just says, "Wait till it's finished." Like he's not gonna tell him.
And Rabbi Milligan's just like, "It ain't right. This ain't right." He's like really peeved by this. He's like, "This isn't." He stops the car in the middle of this road just to like look at it and then talk to this guy. He's like, "What's it gonna say?" And he doesn't tell him what it is. And he's like, "That's not right. You suck."
A little fun, quirky scene. Then they go back in town, and this is like kind of interesting tension building from like a place I didn't think was gonna come. Like it's in this small town with characters we never met, and I thought all the tension would come from Calamita and Omi this episode, chasing after Rabbi Milligan, but it actually doesn't. It's the two brothers. Milligan's trying to get the money from them. They somewhat admit that they did take the money just because it was in the wall, so it's like, why not? Which is very Fargo season 1 / the movie. Oh my god, when Oliver Platt finds the money that Steve Buscemi buried in the snow. It's kind of like that, except if Steve Buscemi didn't, spoilers for the movie, get shoved into a wood chipper, by his
larger hitman acquaintance. I think what you're trying to say is his larger friend threw him into a wood chipper.
into a wood chipper, and could not pledge allegiance to him because he was dead. Right. So it's like if last week, if Gaetano shoved Justo in a wood chipper, Justo would not be in the rest of the episode because he would be dead. But and then the other tension comes from a police officer knocking on Satchel's window when he's in the car and asking if this car belongs to him. And it's just so fucked up to think that less than 100 years ago, this was a very realistic thing that would happen. Like, if a black person was just standing on the street or in a car waiting, a police officer would be like, "Why are you here? Like, what's going on?" And in many ways, that's still happening in America today. And this is juxtaposed with them saying that them taking the money is kind of like the American way. Like, you just kind of try to rise, like, when you get a break. Milligan spares them, takes the money that's left over. Milligan points his gun at one of the brothers, and he goes, "I'm married." And then he points it at the other one, and he goes, like, I'm not married, but who's gonna feed the dogs?
Yeah, really good bit. This was the moment that I was talking about earlier, when Rabbi Milligan decides not to shoot these guys. That's a moment where maybe in a previous episode, maybe in episode 1 of the season, he would have just shot these guys cold-blooded. But he's trying to better himself, and he's trying to just get out of here and do what is right and try to just get the money and get out of here so he and Satchel can have a better life. So it's at least the second time in the episode where one character says to Milligan that you should try to keep Satchel out of sight. The lady at the desk says that the sisters don't want to see him, so just keep him out of sight. And then this cop says keep him out of sight. Maybe I'm just reading too much into the Mike Milligan of it all, but I think that's kind of interesting for where Mike Milligan ends up. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, the tension in that scene was really well done. I thought that was really well directed, well handled. And for a show that's like so much about violence, it's really satisfying sometimes when they choose not to be violent.
And just a weird thing I just thought about with Mike Milligan, it seems like if there is going to be a Mike Milligan reveal, it's going to be the big end reveal. And that just reminds me of Westworld Season 1, where everyone immediately, spoilers for Westworld Season 1, just jump like ahead 30 seconds to a minute, where Jimmy Simpson's character was clearly the Man in Black. And that like everyone knew it. I knew it immediately.
Could you imagine if there was like a little featurette that we found on YouTube of season 4 and Noah Hawley's like, this was really hard to keep from the press. We were crossing out like sides. We wouldn't give them full scripts. Like we didn't have the character name just so that none of the actors would leak any information. Stuff that they do with Star Wars movies.
Anyways, Satchel's back at the hotel. Satchel's always fucking hungry this episode. He keeps saying he's hungry, which I get it. He's very young. This is a really sweet moment because Satchel reveals that today's his birthday. And it's a very sad birthday when you think about it because both of his parents think he's dead. And the only person that knows he is alive are like the people after him and the guy protecting him. And no one knows it's his birthday. And I think this is another moment, how we're talking about Rabbi Milligan trying to be a better person. I think Rabbi Milligan in the first or second episode would be like, well, kid, like, oh, it's your fucking birthday, like, well, happy birthday, and like, we'll just keep going and like moving on with our lives. That's a pretty good rabbi, right? Instead of that, he leaves Satchel without saying anything, and he goes downstairs and he's like, do you have any fucking cake here, or like anything for the kid? And she's like, well, you can go to the gas station. And then that's when I remembered, right, that's the main thing in this episode. And then he passes the future sign, and it's finished, and it says the future is now. And he's like, that's it?
Yeah, he's like, what does that mean? And then the billboard guy is just like, goes on this dissertation. He's like, it could potentially mean the seize the day, or maybe perhaps it's this other thing. I don't know. He's kind of like a wise billboard guy. And he goes back to the bit earlier where he's like, now I have completed my job and I am again out of a job.
Yeah, I am unemployed. And I mean, if that's not a 2020 mood, I don't know what is.
Billboard Man was really good in the scenes that he was in. He was really, really good. To your point about the last line, I'll be back. It's even sadder though, because it's not just him being like, I will be back. It's tell the kid, like if he comes down looking for me, that I'll be right back. So like you mentioned, when he doesn't say anything to Satchel when he leaves the room, that's really sad. But then on top of that, he then says, if the kid does come looking for me, tell him I'll be right back. So again, you're seeing him get closer and closer. I kind of like that they never actually got that close. I'm glad that there was never a scene where Milligan was like, I love you like a son, and I'm like your father. Like that would have been pretty tough. Instead, it's like sort of a cold, detached relationship, but Milligan is persistently trying to help him and move forward. And there's a softening that starts to occur with Milligan throughout the whole season. He's like really, really rough when we first meet him. He's like so by himself, sit in the corner, avoiding eye contact. And that's one other thing about the performance that's so incredible is he like doesn't show his face very much. He's always kind of recoiled. He's got his head down. He's either looking away from people and avoiding eye contact, or he's just trying to get out of the room as fast as possible. So it's an interesting performance. It's again what Fargo does really well. Like you know that he's gonna die, and then he gets another fun little goofy scene with Billboard Man. So
Billboard Man's awesome. Is he Zombie Man? Whoa.
At a certain point, I was thinking, okay, this is like the level to his monologue of like self-awareness for what's happening in the episode. I was like, oh, this is troubling. Maybe he is Zombie Man. Maybe something's about to happen.
Anyways, we move to the penultimate scene, but also the biggest scene in the episode, certainly, in what everyone was marketing, which I don't love for that, because it definitely made me think that the whole episode was going to be a cat and mouse game between Omi, Calamita, and Milligan. But it's only this scene and kind of the opening scene, which is not disappointing if you're never hopeful for anything anymore. So I was fine with it. But I can imagine some people who are hopeful still. I don't know why you are, but how it would be disappointing, because it is a rather fast scene, but that's what's also beautiful about it. It is a fantastic scene. I rewatched the whole thing before we started recording, and it's a great scene. Anyways, it takes place probably like, I want to say like 2 minutes after Calamita arrives probably. The captive guy was dead. Milligan pulls up. We missed an awesome fight, because I'm so curious about Calamita versus Omi. I think that would have been a really cool fight with the muscles, pretty much, of both sides, the Fadas and the cannons. But Calamita gains the upper hand, and Milligan like peeks his way in, and Calamita just has like a sixth sense, I guess, because he shoots twice somehow through the window, missing Milligan. And Milligan starts running away, and traditionally you see like, oh, he'll get in the car and run away, but no, Calamita like shoots him like pretty directly afterwards. And I don't know if Calamita got lucky here or he's just a really good shot. He shot Milligan's right arm, which is like his gun hand. And Milligan can't fucking move his hand now, which is like crazy. And Calamita's about to kill him, but then it's a really beautiful shot. You see Calamita's gun raised, and then in a reflection in a window, you see Omi's hand raise, his gun raise, and he shoots Calamita once, and he's about to kill him, and he runs out of bullets, which is really sad because I think he shot the captive like twice or something. So if he didn't do that, then maybe he would have had one more shot for Calamita. Omi gets killed, and then Milligan gets his hand up, and like this is the moment you're like, oh, he's got the upper hand. Like Calamita's about to die in like a pretty glorious way, and then just wood hits Milligan. The tornado comes. Calamita raises his gun again. And then he just gets taken out by this tornado so fast. And for a second, I thought there was going to be just kind of like a magical moment where Milligan, for some reason, doesn't get taken away from by the tornado. But that is not the case. There's a gorgeous shot that locks in on Milligan as he gets twirled around in the tornado and killing all three characters, everyone in sight. And it looked gorgeous. And it looked like it picked up a lot of stuff. It picked up a couple cars.
That's how I like to judge my tornadoes, is by how much stuff it can pick up. How many bodies it can fling, how many main characters in a season of television it can take out in one moment. The speed of the scene to which you were just talking about is interesting, because it is interesting and sort of realistic. It's a very short scene. It's like it takes place in 2 minutes, but at the same time, I was kind of, it didn't have the same emotional impact as like a character getting shot in the stomach and then bleeding to death in front of us, and then we get a close-up on his eyes as he tilts his head and goes, eh. But, it was, what it did do actually was, we mentioned how this is like a very Wizard of Oz sort of an episode, and when he gets carried up for a brief second, and I think this is why they did it like this, because in my head, if I'm shooting the scene, I cut away from Wishaw within the tornado before he gets picked up, to then the tornado being gone and he's just gone. So he would just be disappeared in that moment. But they didn't do that. They instead follow him into the tornado. And it is this wistful Wizard of Oz magical realism moment. And I think they did that because for a brief second, you think he's actually going to survive. Like somehow, some way, maybe he'll be flung a few feet, but he's going to come back to Satchel and they're going to live out happily ever after. So I think that they, in that camera choice, in that shot choice, I think they were just trying to prolong his life a little bit longer, like in our hearts. And because of that, it's not as impactful of a death, but it kept the hope alive for like an extra second, which I think is an interesting choice. I think he's both of our favorite character, at least one of the top 3 favorite characters from this season. We both think he could have carried a whole season on his own shoulders. And so it sucks to see him go, even though we both thought he was probably not making it out of this episode.
Yeah, it is fast. The pacing does seem a little off because we spend so much like just time like with these like smaller things, and then all of a sudden like you blink and like everyone's dead. But like you were saying, it's very realistic. But and like when Calamita goes, it's like oh my god, like it just really takes Calamita away, which is so sad.
Yeah. Before we jump on to the next scene, let's just give some love to Calamita and to Omi and to Rabbi Milligan a little bit more, just because Omi's death first was like really sad because he finally got like a scene in this episode to like do some chewing as an actor, and his performance in this episode was really good. And again, every time somebody dies on the show, I keep thinking to myself, God, I hope that they get more work. Because I was very compelled by his performance in this episode. I think he has a look that's really unique, and I think he has just a vibe about him that's pretty nice. So when he goes down, I'm like, okay, that's a bummer. But at least we still got Calamita and we still got Rabbi Milligan. And then Calamita, who we haven't gotten like a ton of in the last week we didn't get any Calamita at all. And then the previous week, it was pretty much just him about to go on the hunt. I was so sad that we didn't get a Calamita scene in this episode because he was so cool. He was one of the coolest bad guys on the show. Yeah, and my last point before we jump into the next scene is I'm even more sad because what I'm realizing is we're killing a bunch of our favorite side characters so that we could focus in on the story a little bit more, and we're focusing in on something that I don't care about as much as these other characters. Like the threads that I really loved, one of them was this Rabbi Milligan character and how he was going to protect Satchel. We knew that wasn't going to last long. I really liked Calamita. I really liked Deafy. I really liked, obviously, Swanee. I liked all of these things, and they were all really fun little side pieces. And and we had to cut them so that we could get to the heart of what the show is. But now I'm realizing what the heart of the show is, and it's actually not that interesting. Like in the next week on Fargo, which we'll talk about once we get to predictions, it's really focusing in on the war between these two groups, and it's really Justo and Gaetano versus Loy and Ethelrita.
Yeah, no, we'll get to that. I have some weird thoughts about that. But yeah, and like we always say, a big shout out to the actors of Omi, Calamita, and Rabbi Milligan. They did such a good job this season, and I mean, Dan, it looks like we're pretty on point with the prediction. We said very early on that this was going to be the bloodiest season, and I mean, when you're stacking up main character bodies, we're at like 6 already, which, whoa, Devil Watch.
Oh, there we go. There wasn't a lot of Devil Watch this episode.
Not a lot. But yeah, 6 characters died so far in the 9th episode. Yeah, moving on. Satchel's alone now, and he's sleeping a bit, and then he wakes up, and it's all colorful again, and this house is beautiful. You like almost forget how much color adds when you're watching something in black and white for so long, and it is just beautiful. There's that weird mystical element where he like walks past that room that he walked past earlier, and he like sees these like Artemis Fowl looking motherfuckers.
No relation.
Like they look like they're in a young adult novel, you know? Like this kid's like a young scientist, and like he's like helping his like friend who like got burned or something, and he's like making him a robot in the 1950s or something weird. It's again, this is the thing I love about this episode. It's like every side character has like a full story. You know, post tornado, it's like the classic Wizard of Oz thing.
It's I mean, it's funny, the whole Wizard of Oz, Toto and Dorothy thing was somewhat apparent right from the get-go when the dog jumps out of the thing. But in those final moments when they're just walking down the road together, like it's so Wizard of Oz. And him staring at the future is now thing, it was interesting because now Satchel going forward, because we see him in the next week's episode, going forward, he's his own character. Like I don't know how much he'll be in the rest of the season, but he'll be in some of it, and he's going to be taking action. So he gets to be like his own person, which is really cool. So the future is now. He's taking control of his life, and he's going to start to become the Mike Milligan that we once knew. But it's also sad because what that billboard actually is like a poster for the thing that he ends up hating. It's like this corporate America, suburban nuclear family structure. And then in season 2, at the end of season 2, if you haven't seen season 2, he ends up at like a boring corporate office job. And so it's kind of where he ends up.
So yeah, I mean, I think the most interesting part about Satchel, like looking at that at the end is, you know, it says the future is now, and like Mike Milligan, like years later in season 2, like in his final scene, his boss is like, "This is the future," and it's like, it's kind of like a sad ending because obviously, like the future is now seems like an optimistic slogan, but like also whatever the future is for Satchel or Mike Milligan, like is always somewhat sad, especially for a black man living in the 1950s. Yeah, Dan, pretty simple episode. Definitely, like, I don't think anything besides Satchel is really going to come back this episode. I mean, obviously, I want the guy with the eye patch to come back in some way, but I doubt he will. Wouldn't that be funny if he was an X Factor character? But yeah, so, like, just, like, predictions, we'll just, like, run down, like our big predictions, and then we'll just like go through like where each character stood last time we saw them, because every character in this episode besides Satchel pretty much died. So yeah, I think the biggest thing in the trailer for next week's episode is Ethelrita is meeting with Loy, and she says, "I'm gonna help you win this war."
I'll say it. I hate it.
Yeah, I know. I thought it was weird.
I don't like that very much at all. I mean, maybe we should have seen this coming. I think I jokingly, or not really jokingly, but sort of haphazardly said, like, what is Ethelreda's like ultimate purpose in the story? Is she going to end up somehow winning this war for the cannons? I think I said those words exactly at one point, but I didn't really mean it because I thought that would be silly and a bit strange. So her coming in there and basically being like, I am a super genius, I can help you win this war. I guess it makes sense because she is a super genius and she could probably help them win this war because it's being run by a bunch of stupid idiots. Like Justo and Gaetano are dumb, and Loy is also kind of dumb. So it's nice that Ethelreda can come in and be like, this is what you're doing wrong and this is how you win. But I just don't.
And then Loy next episode is going to be like, okay, I see what's happening here. I'm the bull, and you're the snake. They're just going to have a Justo Gaetano
Are you saying that
scene.
Loy is going to throw Ethelreda through a table?
Most likely, and then pledge his allegiance to her. I definitely think it could happen. Which is just kind of, I don't know. I don't love it just because I feel like Loy and Ethelreda just don't have anything right now. The only thing connecting them is Thurman / Debril.
Who we haven't seen in so long. We haven't gotten enough Thurman.
Where is Thurman? Andrew Bird, where are you?
Where is he? Yeah, you coward, show yourself.
There was a great featurette, I just want to say, that's out about him. And in it, he's just like, I've never acted before, so like, this is just kind of like how I am as a person. And then Noah Hawley's like, I never wanted him to act in this, all right? I just knew he had something. And that's a horrible Noah Hawley, but I imagine he's just like that and constantly.
Especially this season, he's very Italian, I would imagine. I think the big question with the Ethelreda portion of this is like, what do we think her winning the war looks like? Because she's obviously not going to be the muscle. Like she's got one ace in the hole. She's got one card up her sleeve, and in terms of like what she knows versus like what she doesn't know, she knows Orietta, and she just knows that like Orietta is somewhat connected to Justo. And then what else does she know? She like doesn't know anything about the war that's going on. She's been kept in the dark by her parents.
Yeah, and it's also when you brought that up, it's somewhat disappointing to remember that Orietta is kind of on the Fada side, and then Ethelreda's going to the canon side, which just like segregates these characters more so than the season already has. So I don't absolutely love it. I mean, I have 3 answers for you.
Give me the third one first, then the first one, then the second one.
Okay. My serious answer, which I was going to say last, but since you said say it first, would be that somehow like Ethelreda like brings them all together in some way and like makes like a cohesive, like what I was talking about earlier this season, like she creates like a cohesive environment with Mort Kellerman, the Fadas, and the Cannons somehow. Like that just turns into modern, like a few years later, Fargo. Like that syndicate that like Dodd / Otto eventually like take over. And that's kind of the thing. And then Milligan and Joe Bulo go off together somewhere, and then they have the Kansas City mob going on. Yeah, and then my goofy answer is that Ethelreda summons Zombie Man to kill all the Fadas. And that is the thing that happens. And my goofiest answer is that akin to Return of the Jedi, Ethelreda gets logs and ties them to trees, and then Justo and Gaetano walk through the forest, and then she cuts them, and it crushes their head, similar to the AT-ST that the Ewoks take down in Return of the Jedi.
Which is interesting because Gaetano, if you do remember, right before he pledged his allegiance, he said, "I'm the ATST. You're also the ATST." What does Ethelreda have to gain? Well, obviously her family's in debt to the cannons, so this is a motivated decision for her to get involved. She knows that the only way to get the cannons off of their backs and to get a normal family life again is to somehow intervene and do something. So that's part one. Part two, what is something? I think your point about Ethelreda being the one who creates the Kansas City that we eventually we know is really interesting. She certainly would not be credited for it. So that would be sort of an interesting ending that would be, again, akin to the whole credit card thing that's been going on this season, where Loy has an idea for something and then it gets totally just stolen by white people. That would be interesting. I don't think it's going to go there, though. I think it's tough because, again, what does Ethelreda actually have to offer? And right now, I think it's just Orietta. But again, what's her plan? She goes in there and she's like, I know a crazy nurse lady who lives across the street who's been talking to that guy who I think is your enemy, Justo Fada.
Right, because she does know Justo and Orietta are together. Okay, here's a crazy prediction again I'm thinking of. We get fucking Harvard into this.
Yes. He's back, baby.
Hell yeah, because he's back. He is alive. So, how... Because Ethelreda wrote Dr. Harvard.
Right.
So how can Dr. Harvard... And the Fadas hate Dr. Harvard. So how can Dr. Harvard manage to get with the cannons and work up the courage to defeat all his enemies? Would it be through him making macaroons? Yes.
And then he writes a little note on it and he says, from your one true love, Orietta, because Ethelreda and Harvard get together, okay? So they become a dynamic duo. And Ethelreda's like, hey, I know that she is in with the Fadas. And then Harvard says, okay, I'm going to make macaroons and then send them to the Fadas, and we're going to pretend like it's from her. He'll eat the macaroon, and then that'll be the end of the show.
Yeah. It's a cliffhanger. They don't eat the macaroons ever.
It's like the end of season 3. But they're just like, should we eat the macaroons? What does this mean for the future of America?
What is the story you want to tell? And why did Dr. Harvard have the most insane arc this season?
But no, I mean, for I think that we haven't seen the linchpin. Because where we left Orietta,
yeah,
she was about to go probably murder Ethelreda. She just found out that Ethelreda had been in her closet, and she was about to leave town, but now she has to stay to go kill Ethelreda. So maybe we haven't seen what happens in the beginning of the episode. Maybe Orietta falls into a trapdoor in their weird morgue house. And then they have Orietta locked up, and he's like, or then Ethelreda's like, I have a piece of the puzzle that I can offer you. I don't think anything that silly will happen, obviously, but I think we haven't seen what Ethelreda has to offer yet, so it's tough to make a prediction on what
exactly.
that is.
And just to run down real fast, Justo also is getting arrested by Otis in the preview, which is kind of insane. Otis, and we'll do a quick rundown of where everyone is, just so we can catch everyone up to speed before episode 10, the penultimate episode, which is typically in Fargo the biggest episode of the season. So a lot's going to go down. But yeah, Otis making more decisions for himself, it seems. And it's kind of cool because we always thought Daffy was going to be the good cop, but it looks like Otis had kind of a reverse arc, and we'll see if instead of continuing down a bad path, now he's going down a good path, even though he did kill a U.S. Marshal last episode. Yeah.
And and our beloved Swanee.
He
so,
really,
I mean,
yeah.
there's no coming back.
He really
for Otis,
shot her in the
but
face real fast.
just real quick while we're on Otis, though, if we're talking like over-unders, I feel like it's a 60% chance that Zelmar kills Otis, right? That just makes sense. Like that just maybe it's a bit too obvious, but like that seems like it might be where it's going. I think Otis is going to try to take more control. He's going to try to clean up the situation so that he can be free of all this stuff with both rival organizations. So he's going to be going in there trying to not de-escalate, that's not the right word, but just dismantle the two nuclear bombs that are about to go off. But it's too late. I think the bombs are going to go off. And in his case, I think Zelmar is going to come back into the story and probably find a way to
Zombie Man's going to kill Otis.
That's a way better.
No, I mean, it's more ridiculous. I'm just saying it now, so like if it does happen, we get credit for it. From Noah Hawley. But anyways, I feel like we had some goofy ass predictions this year, but this episode, but I think they could be going somewhere. Let's just do a real quick rundown of where our main characters stand. Ethelreda, last time we saw her, she was exiting her home, and it looks like she's going to be hooking up with Loy. Loy, last time we checked in, he just gave up Zelmar and Swanee. So Zelmar's probably going to be after him also, because he's the only person that would know they're at the train station. Going off Zelmar, she just escaped the clutches of Otis. Otis was staring at a dead Deafy last time we saw him. Josto and Gaetano were staring at their dead mother last time we saw them. Fargo just attacked the Fadas. Let's see. Thurman and Debril were wishing Ethel a happy birthday. Or at least Thurman was. Debril had a good scene with Buell last time we saw her. And I think... And then Orietta was looking out her window last time we saw her, and she was very angry. And the most important, saving him for last, Dr. Harvard had survived his poisoning.
Like a true hero does.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think he's the main character of this season.
Here's my only Harvard question. Do you think that he plays any more part in the rest of the season? Is there something that's going to happen there? Like, obviously, I don't expect to see him on screen anymore, but does he, now that he's out of the coma, does he just immediately rat out Orietta, and then cops show up at Orietta's house next episode, like right from the get-go, and then she's on the run?
I think that...
To what level do you think Harvard's involved?
I think that's what you said. I think the actor didn't know he survived. Because I don't think he's in the rest of the season, if I'm being honest. I think it would also be really sad for us, at least. The biggest Harvard simps out there, to just see him like in a coma and coming to that it would just be too much to explain. So if we see him, I think he's either just gonna die fully for some reason, or he's just gonna again call the cops, and it's gonna be all off screen. But yeah, and all these characters are at their edge. Also, just Ebel real fast. Ebel was looking very angry at Gaetano and Josto getting together. So, should be a very interesting penultimate episode. I think we're losing at least 2 main characters next episode is my prediction.
Okay.
It's the penultimate episode. I think something crazy is going to happen.
I think if we're talking about main characters in terms of most likely to die next episode and least likely, I think Loy is least likely. I think Loy makes it through close to the end. He probably will die in the end, though. Justo is kind of in the middle for me right now. He could make it, he could not make it. Orietta, I think, makes it. Ethelreda makes it. Thurman absolutely 100% makes it, as does DeBrail. Otis is also sort of like a little bit below 50-50 for me. Like, I think he could have like a huge episode this week, and he could be taking a lot of action, and then at the end of the episode catch a bullet from somebody. And then everyone else is dead or a side character.
Zelmar?
So, and Zelmar, I think Zelmar's going to make it out of the season.
Okay.
Unless she makes a decision like Nikki did in season 3, where she makes a selfish choice for revenge. And then Gaetano, I think Gaetano makes it until the last episode.
Okay.
Because he's the bull.
I'm the bull. A great character. Cool though. Yeah, I'm really excited for the penultimate episode. It's called Happy, and I have a feeling it's gonna be sad.